is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
A new vision will govern our land.
Our job is not to divide. Our job is to bring people together.
By the people, for the people, and of the people.
Our youth has power.
We have a special guest joining us to discuss Bad Bunny's viral video and his political activism efforts, Professor Arthur Soto-Vasquez. He is a communication professor at TAMIU and teaches political communication, rhetoric of pop culture, among other courses. He had this to say.
Hello, my name is Dr. Soto-Vasquez. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology and Communication at Texas A&M International University. I've been a part of this department and university for about 2 years now, and I study a wide variety of topics, all related to communication and media studies. I mostly focus on topics in the United States dealing with the identity, mediation of and mobilization of Latinos in the United States, both as voters and as consumers within our particular society. And so many of the courses I teach at TAMIU are related to these topics. So I've taught pop culture studies in the past. I've also taught just general intro to media studies. At the graduate level, I've taught Latino communication studies, as well as a course I'm teaching this semester on digital borders and digital bridges, which looks at how the internet as a communication technology can be used to both bring different groups of people together on this shared platform, but also be used to amplify and reify existing differences among these populations. I'm also teaching this semester an undergraduate class, which is one of my favorite topics, centered on political communication. And so I've been asked by the Political Science Association to share some thoughts on the recent music video by reggaeton artist Bad Bunny, and tie them into some larger kind of concepts and themes that we discuss in that course. So let me tell you just a little bit about it. Political communication looks at how messages that are constructed, mediated, shared, and transmitted within the political system, and that's very broadly defined. That includes political actors, the news media, citizens groups, activist groups, and everyday citizens, how those messages are then used to create meaning in a political system. Okay, so I wanted to share a couple of theories that are foundational to political communication, and I think that'll help structure this discussion of the impact of this particular video from Bad Bunny. So a couple things that we discuss in it. One important theory in political communication is the idea of agenda setting. And so folks who've studied, scholars who've studied political communication have for years tried to figure out, well, what is the impact of the media in terms of shaping people's opinion on political issues? And so one thing they have settled on over time is that while the media may not have the best ability to shape how people think about a particular issue, maybe their opinion on, say, abortion or gun rights or immigration, the media does have a really powerful impact in shaping what issues people think about as being the most important ones, right? So if I were to ask, get 100 people from TAMIU right now what they think are the top 5 important issues going on in society today, I would guarantee you that the number one issue would be related to the coronavirus epidemic and pandemic. Okay. And obviously it is an important issue, but it is also partly an important issue because the news media has almost exclusively covered it as an important issue in the last few weeks. So we would call that phenomenon agenda setting. The news media has a power to tell us what the most important issues are in any given time. Another example of this to think about is if you ever watch the local news outside of coronavirus times, is they almost always lead with a story about violence and crime, right? Violent crime, a robbery, something along those lines. Research has found that folks who watch the local news on a regular basis tend to think the community that they live in, whatever city or town, is more violent than it actually is. We call this the mean world syndrome, right? So the media has a very powerful ability to shape not necessarily how we think about an issue, but at least what issues we think of as important to think about and address as a society. So that's the first theory, agenda setting, that I wanted to raise. One thing that's been talked about in my class very much, and addresses this concept of, well, how does the media shape public opinion? Of course, the media also has a power to shape how we think about issues as well. It is not quite as powerful as agenda setting, but it is a concept we refer to as framing, right? And so you can think of how, in terms of framing, how we define it is what aspects of a story does the news media choose to focus on, right? And so, let's take a random sort of political issue. We can think about gun violence, for example. The media may choose to frame a new mass shooting as a isolated incident that's a tragedy, but ultimately nothing we can do much about it. That's one particular frame of a story. While another news media outlet might choose to frame it as another long and sort of incident in this long history of gun violence in the United States. So the way in which the news media chooses to sort of zoom in on certain aspects of a story, because there's many different ways a story can be covered, is what we would call the process of framing. So that's another way in which the news media and media in general can shape public opinion. The last one that I wanted to mention, because I think it's very important to understand in regard to this particular video from Bad Bunny, is that there's a theory in political communication known as cultivation theory, right? So one thing I want to emphasize to everyone listening to this and anybody interested in this topic is that the news media does not work like a vaccine, right? It doesn't automatically change your opinion of something by watching one thing. That was a theory known as the hypodermic needle theory, which really is no longer widely discussed or used in political communication. You might have remembered some of the controversies over violent video games and do they cause people to become violent. And the overwhelming evidence is that they don't. But rather, we should look at something known as cultivation theory, which instead posits that one particular form of media may not change your mind, but over time, the repeated instances of those ideas in media can change your mind in sort of marginal but progressive sort of ways, right, over time. And this can work for somebody who is being exposed to conservative media, progressive media, liberal media over time, or a media for even just any sort of particular issue that they are advocating. The sustained over many years, repetition of messages will have an impact on somebody's particular worldview. I think this is especially important to emphasize that young people, when they are in their formative years of developing their opinions about social issues, are more than likely to be shaped by cultivating media messages. So, walking away from this, I would just want to mention that, one particular video may not have a huge change in public opinion, but if it is occurring within a larger sort of movement around either LGBTQ acceptance, violence against women, then it can have a cultivation effect on people's opinions. So let's talk a little bit about the video, and I think what significance it does carry, right? So I would assume your listeners are well aware of it and have seen it, so I don't need to describe too much, but obviously it is a statement against LGBTQ violence and as well as just general sort of violence against women as well. And I think what is interesting about the music video itself is Bad Bunny's appearance in drag, which sort of course, catches people's attention, but also calls into focus many of these issues as well. And so there's a very powerful statement that he is making with this video, which further amplifies the lyrics of the song itself. One thing I would suggest that is useful about Bad Bunny making this kind of media statement is that more than likely it is reaching folks on the internet and on in the general media environment that would not normally be exposed to this kind of messaging about LGBTQ issues and general gender sort of violence issues. Right. One thing researchers have found about the internet and media, especially now in this very hyper-mediated with a lot of different choices kind of media environment, right? There's hundreds of channels, many websites, is that we tend to silo ourselves into small groups of communities online that increasingly kind of sound and talk to each other without much outside influence. And so, if all of your friends on Facebook generally agree with you and are in your social network, you might not be exposed to different perspectives about maybe issues that you think of. However, I think something like this video has the opportunity, just because he is a well-known reggaeton artist who is young, dynamic, sort of iconoclastic, to reach into different audiences and potentially expose them to these ideas. Of course, that also does provoke a lot of controversy, right? Because audiences that are not used to this type of messaging and sort of political statements may react very, may be very reactionary and not want to even consider sort of these ideas. So of course there is that kind of potential as well, but there's also potential, just as Bad Bunny, who is a celebrity, to get into groups that may not always be open or thinking about these messages, especially given our highly siloed kind of information system and regime. So y'all asked if celebrities can get across messages better than politicians, and I would say I'm not quite sure, to be honest. I think celebrity impact of messaging is researched, and there's kind of sort of conflicting information on how effective it actually is. One thing to note is that there always is a potential just to sort of preach to the choir of people who already agree with these statements, may already be a fan. So if you are interested in sort of and more progressive on LGBTQ issues, you may already be a fan of Bad Bunny. And so his new video may just further reinforce your beliefs, while those who simply are not will not watch it or be able to input it. And that works the same with politicians, right? If you already have a negative opinion of, say, the president, Donald Trump, you may be less likely to be swayed by his information, right? And there's been many research on the fact that even just changing the name of the messenger, even the same message, maintaining it, will influence how people respond positively or favorably to that policy. Just adding Trump's name or taking it off can shape somebody's opinion about something. Now, taking a step back, though, and looking more particularly at musicians and their way of sort of blending and blurring the lines between the masculine and the feminine, androgynous aspects of their identity. This has been a long sort of history and trend within popular music since at least the 1930s and 40s, I would argue, right? You have artists like David Bowie and Michael Jackson, I would even argue, Lady Gaga, who have blurred the lines both between gender but also race. And so one thing I would provoke to y'all to think about is even the earliest musicians in American history borrowed extensively between white and black music. And there was a lot of blurring of those genre lines as well, right? Rock and roll is sort of a synthesis of rhythm and blues, other musical genres originated by Black artists that was sort of adopted and co-opted by white artists and made mainstream and popular. But arguably over time, even Black artists within the rock and roll and popular music genres gained prominence and were able to break down some of the barriers of race in society in the 1950s, 1960s. Of course, we're not there yet totally, and there's still much more progress to be made. But looking at our recent history about within the United States over the last 50 years about how racial barriers have been taken down or at least minimized, I would say music did play a role in normalizing those types of social relations. Of course, there still is much farther to go as well in terms of gender roles, but I think musicians can also play a role there in destigmatizing some of these issues around masculinity, femininity, LGBTQ issues, etc. Right, and partly because musicians are iconoclastic, right? They like to be a little different and go against sort of social norms, and that's why one reason why art and music is just so important in any kind of democratic and open society, right? It pushes us to think of new ways of looking at issues. What's interesting, particularly about Bad Bunny, is that he crosses national boundaries. I've mostly focused on U.S. issues, and that's my expertise. But Bad Bunny is, of course, a Latin American artist who reaches across all different countries in the American Western Hemisphere and the Americas in generally. Even though I'm not as familiar with those issues, I mean, obviously, machismo is very much an issue discussed within Latin America context, right? And so, responding to one of your last questions here about machismo, this one particular video, like I've stated before, in this idea of cultivation theory, may not cause somebody to unlearn their behavior. And for certain folks who are have been grown up in the society that is just normalized, that unlearning process may take a lifetime. But what I would suggest to you, though, and some positive news here, is that those of us who are younger, or even children growing up in this time, whose worldview is being shaped right now, will be exposed to these messages, and changing of opinions will take much, will take longer, but are possible, to change. One thing that strikes me, and it's to the point now where we don't even really recognize it, at least in the United States, was that there was a very strong bias in our political system against Catholics, people who were followers of Roman Catholicism. And there was a question of whether there would ever be a Catholic president. And even now, former Vice President Joe Biden is a Catholic. There are majority of Catholics on the Supreme Court, and it is basically a non-issue. The Pope came to visit the United States several years ago, and the Speaker of the House and the Vice President were both Catholic, and it was just a non-issue. Nobody talked about it. So it just goes to show that our opinions on things can change, and they change slowly, but over time, as these messages are cultivated in society, they can emerge, right? So don't expect to change overnight, but over time, it is certainly possible. Okay, so that's as much as I want to share and say. I've probably talked and rambled on too long. As my students know, I am prone to do so in my classes. I do want to share one last message as we go through this difficult and uncertain time of the coronavirus pandemic and epidemic. Obviously, you should follow all public health directions, minimize your socializing, right? So that means don't go outside when you don't have to, right? Limit your trips to the grocery store. But I think in specific terms for those of us at TAMIU, I as a professor am trying my best to recognize this is a difficult time for my students, and I'm trying to be gentle and be kind to all of them. It's not normal times, right? And I think as much as we can look out for each other and be kind to each other, I've committed to my students that I'm there for them as much as they can be for me, and we should do this for the love of learning, not necessarily for any particular grade or outcome other than that. So I hope that in these difficult times we can come together as a community and support each other and do the best we can to look out for everyone in our university community and our community in general and our nation and the global community as well. So thank you for inviting me to discuss this important topic on your podcast, and I look forward to the interesting discussions that will follow. Thank you very much.
So hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Border Talks. My name is Cecy Jimenez. I'm currently a junior at TAMIU, and I'm a double major in political science and sociology, and I'm a member of the Political Science Association. And today I'm joined by
Emily Walker
and Alex Hernandez.
So today's topic is about Bad Bunny's political statements. And we're going to dive into a conversation about toxic masculinity, LGBTQ plus rights, and women's rights. This podcast, we will be using the term Latinx because being that we are talking about LGBTQ plus issues, we want to make sure that we're including everyone in the conversation, being that we're talking about political statements that are about inclusivity. So for those of you guys who don't know who Bad Bunny is, his full name is actually Benito Antonio Martinez Ocasio. He's 26 and his stage name is Bad Bunny. He's a Puerto Rican singer and rapper, and most of his music is known in the Latin trap or reggaeton genre, but he does include a variety of other infusions of music, including rock, bachata, and soul. And he studied at the University of Puerto Rico and got his degree in audiovisual communications. However, recently, he's gotten extra attention for his music because of his Yo Perreo Sola video and overall his political activism, which is something that, like I mentioned, we're going to be exploring today.
So, since the release of his Yo Perreo Sola video that he uploaded on March 27th, there's been a lot of buzz in the community, the public, and the media because of what was contained in the video. So, in the video, Bad Bunny is seen in drag, which a lot of people consider him making a public statement about breaking gender roles and stereotypes. After this, he started receiving some backlash from the community, some people who disagreed with him, some people who also agreed with him, and they congratulated him on making a public statement. As a reaction, he actually released an Instagram post, a photo of himself in drag, and he captioned it, "Cálmense que yo solo tengo amor para ustedes."
So I'm not a Bad Bunny fan until yesterday when I had to research everything. But I mean, even I know who Bad Bunny is, and I kind of know his personality and how he's like. So when the video came out, I wasn't that surprised. So I'm surprised that there's backlash from the Latin community of this video, because it's, I mean, to Bad Bunny and knowing who he is, this doesn't seem like a far detached thing that he would do. And including this. I don't know why it's such a problem when Latin artists do something like this, when white artists have been dressing as a woman, their videos for the longest time, including black artists. But as soon as it happens to a Latin artist, he attempts to do something like this, that's immediately attacked by people.
Right. I think this shows it points to a really big problem that we still have in the Latinx community, which is that we still face a lot of homophobia, problems with misogyny, and he even includes it in the green room portion of his video where he shows the Ni una más and Las mujeres mandan messages in that portion of the video, which is referring to the Ni una más movement, which started in Argentina and has quickly swept all parts of Latin America because women are protesting against feminicide and negligence that their government has refused to pay attention.
Yeah, there's kind of been this whole feminist movement that's kind of been moving sort of from the South America up into Latin America and Central and North America. Because so we'll touch on him in a bit, but I have the former governor, I guess I would say now's opinion on these feminist marches that's going on in Puerto Rico, which kind of inspire Bad Bunny's, support for these types of movements in his music videos.
Right. So another really recent thing that he's done in the media that got a lot of attention right before his Yo Perreo Sola video was his performance on the Jimmy Fallon show. He performed the song Ignorantes while wearing a t-shirt, basically translated to they murdered Alexa, not a man in a skirt. And so this was a transgender woman, Alexa Negron, who was killed in Puerto Rico, and they accused her of using a mirror in the bathroom of McDonald's to peep on women, but of course there was never any proof of that. She was ultimately shot by presumably a group of men who were recording her, and her family did not give her a funeral service, and so there was a lot of uproar by activists and members of the LGBTQ plus community, and so Bad Bunny took a stand on that on his February 27th performance there in Jimmy Fallon while wearing a skirt to show that he is a man wearing a skirt and Alexa is actually a woman, regardless of whether or not she is transgender. He was, bringing attention to the fact that people were calling her a man in a skirt when ultimately she is a woman.
Right, there's a huge difference between Bad Bunny and Alexa Negron. And I read actually online that Alexa Negron had been carrying around a mirror because she always knew kind of that there were people, she wanted to watch her back because she knew that she was going to be a target, especially in Latin America because of toxic masculinity, the machismo culture. LGBT rights are not quite as progressive as they are here in America. I mean, even in America, we have a long way to go still, but, it's unfortunate what happened. So in Bad Bunny's Yo Perreo Sola video, some messages that we could see, it opens up with him as a child. That's a common theme in his music videos that he recently released. And then it starts with him in a red room. He is dressed as a woman. He debuts in high heels and he kind of is embracing his sexuality, the way that he's moving, and this captures your attention right away because he chose red. So it's absolutely, his outfit's red, the color's red, and how red is a color in art that represents strength and fierceness and sexuality, and that's the color that he chose to open up his video with to make a statement.
Right, and I think notably within that scene, as it's the video's progressing along, you see that there's shirtless men that are trying to get at this drag persona that Bad Bunny has, and he eventually shakes his hand and starts twerking, being very open about his sexual movements, while you see the men ultimately be flown away from his powerful movements. And so it's really funny, but I think it also shows a really important message, which he pretty much touches on at the end of the video, where he ends with it saying, "Si no quiere bailar contigo, respeta, ella perrea sola," which translates to, if she doesn't want to dance with you, respect her, she dances by herself. And other important elements as far as the different rooms go that are shown in the video, to me, one that really stood out was the pink floral room, where you see a bunch of flower bushes that eventually jump up, take life, and start twerking, which again seems like something that's really ridiculous, but I think he's ultimately sending the message that this thing that we typically view as feminine and delicate, which would be the flowers, are having a life of their own and taking charge of their sexuality. And even though it's kind of funny, they're twerking and they're being shown as very powerful beings.
It's also the only room in which Bad Bunny is just himself, I guess, his actual identity, where he's just staying on top of the car, and he's not really dressed as anything else but himself, but yet it's like the most feminine room out of all the video, because you have these flowers and it's like all pink and his outfit's all pink, and he's like standing on top of like there's like Rolls Royce, so he's kind of like stepping on this material wealth. No, I'm kidding, he's not a communist. But he represents himself as a man in like this very feminine room, which I think like takes a like is a separation from like the rest of the rooms, where in each one he kind of portrays himself as a woman.
Right, and I think that shows it's a really big step as far as showing men who are comfortable in their masculinity, even in these rooms that are all covered in things that are traditionally deemed to be feminine, like flowers and pink. And I think it's really respectable and great for me to see that there's this man who has a really big platform in the Latinx community that has a problem with toxic masculinity, being very comfortable with doing things like this. And even the fact that he's doing drag, he's bringing attention to different art forms that a lot of people have confusion on and that are typically underground.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like, I guess to me, not the Bad Bunny fan in the room, but I guess it's kind of where he got a lot of attention, where he's like, okay, he's like this, I don't like using the word, but like this woke celebrity artist who's like bringing these attentions to light, where, you know, I kind of started with the Alexis situation, but he kind of has like this history, like of since he became an artist, of like fighting for these issues. But now like he's like a more popular person, you're actually seeing that on like your timeline on Twitter or Facebook.
And I think that there's this big misconception where people think that, and even he's said it himself, that people sometimes think that he's being opportunistic and just using this as a big marketing ploy. But if you really look at the videos and his previous work, which, you know, we'll talk about later on in this episode, he does have a pretty extensive history taking a stand. But I think this video marks one of the biggest, and I think that's why it's gotten the most attention, because as a big Bad Bunny fan, I do hear a lot of his music, and I do interact with a lot of people who are his fans, of course, and I don't think they're typically the people who, I also don't like using this word, but woke. I don't think they're generally, don't think his fans are generally the people who are all into like cancel culture and like all of these things. And so I think he's aware of that, and part of the reason why he's taken so much of a stand could be because he wants to push this message on his listeners, a lot of which who are men in the Latinx community.
Yeah. So I guess we kind of start talking about his like beginning with political activism and his like first messages as an artist.
Yeah, we could go to like 2017 thing.
Yeah. So I guess we'll go back in time to where he kind of got his first popularity. So in his 2017 music video, Tu no vive así, the first controversy, which is like so silly because like everyone wears these shorts now, even like guys. There's a controversy about him wearing shorts that were like above the knee, and he was fighting with his stylist about like, oh, you know, that they might not like this. Your shorts a little bit too high up. It might raise some eyebrows, and they're like, what about the community? But I mean, being Bad Bunny was like, whatever, you know, I'm still gonna wear these. I'm gonna express myself in the way I want to, and that's kind of been his message since like even back then. I mean, he's still like a staple of like doing whatever you want, which is like the title of like his new album. Yeah, or like a me la gana.
Exactly.
Like he got a quote that was there's a quote from Paper Magazine, and he was kind of addressing this, and it's I'm not telling people, hey, paint your nails or color your hair or do this or do that. I'm simply saying do what makes you happy and never limit yourself. Just be yourself and be happy in that, and also not to criticize or judge, because maybe for you something's bad or not bad. If if you like or dislike something, that doesn't mean everyone has to share your opinion. It's about that respect. It's so basic.
Right, and I love that quote, and I think that's something that you see in pretty much all, if not most, of his music videos and his lyrics. He really always talks about being open, and I think he puts self-expression at the forefront of his art, which I think is why he's gotten so big over just a few years. And being that he is a man in the Latinx community, there's a lot of restrictions that are placed on him by machismo and like toxic masculinity as a whole. So it's really great to see that there's an artist out here who's pushing away from that and pushing against toxic masculinity overall. And while we have seen previous artists do this in the rock genre and other places, I think it's especially important for him to be doing this because the Latinx community hasn't seen a straight heterosexual or a heterosexual cis man do this. And especially within the genre that he mostly makes his music in, which is reggaeton and trap Latino or urbano, that genre has a complex history with sexualizing women and showing men as these big macho men who like have a bunch of women dancing next to them in their music videos. And he's been pushing away from that and giving a lot more space for expression in the genre as a whole.
So there are some music videos, I think there's like a couple, like literally two, where he's kind of following the trend of like these, you know, reggaetoneros or, you know, trap artists, stylistic like music video choices where he does have women that are kind of more exposed or they're like all over him. But I mean, I just kind of want to emphasize that those are like the earlier videos, and I think he's just following the trend of being like a trap artist and kind of breaking into like the US mode. Because I think of any artist that's trying to rise up, you're kind of forced to mimic what's popular at the time. So at 2017, he's like kind of coming to his stardom. You see these videos are kind of very similar to other like reggaetonero videos or trap artist videos, and it's not until like 2018, 2019, and you know, especially now in 2020, he's breaking that mold of himself and kind of like stylizing his own videos, and he really has a vision for what he wants to do.
And I think a lot of his success definitely comes from that vision that he has and staying true to himself, which ultimately for him means to have a voice in his community and talk about things that are important to who he is as a person. So like Puerto Rico and self-expression. We've seen a lot of his nail looks where he paints his nails and has a bunch of different extravagant looking outfits.
So when Bad Bunny started painting his nails, he kind of made it his iconic look, because in his genre of music, which is like trap, reggaeton, Latino music, he really, like, you don't really see that very often. Or at all. He kind of made a huge statement by normalizing painting your nails. And he even has a music video. Which one is it that he is seen at the beginning of the music video getting his nails done? It's the one where he actually has a female playing him.
Right, so the first time he showcases himself getting his nails painted is in the Estamos Bien video, which is a really upbeat video where he's basically just celebrating and like seemingly on vacation with his other male buddies. But in that video, nobody looks at him different or even contests why he's painting his nails, which, like you mentioned, very much normalizes it. And then he especially makes note of this in the Caro music video, where he features a woman who looks like him pretty much, and is not traditionally feminine presenting. So again, pushing the gender boundaries to show different individuals. In that video as well, he features a runway where different models come out, one of which was a drag queen, a woman with Down syndrome, a more feminine presenting Black man, and even a pregnant woman. So he's very much about, like we've mentioned already, self-expression and moving away from toxic masculinity, pushing for women's rights and just for self-expression as a whole.
Yeah, and inclusivity is also another important thing to note. Just accepting or acknowledging that you can be any kind of person. You can be a male who likes femininity. You can be a transgender woman. You can be a woman. You can be pregnant. I mean, he includes like every single, a lot of like parts of genders of the spectrum. And he allows all of them to express their femininity on his platform. And he says, look, this is normal. It's important to respect, you know, everybody's individuality and their individual portrayal of femininity, you know?
Right, and he's gotten a lot of homophobic trolls who, you know, are in his social media comments talking about his manicures or wanting him to stop getting his nails done. And there was an instance at a Spanish salon where they even denied him service because he was a man, and this was while he was during his European tour. But there have been other artists who have come to his defense. So J Balvin has defended him before, saying that, quote, what he's doing with his nails is very beautiful. People are only seeing the nails, but that's not the message. The message is to be yourself, which, like we've all talked about, we've definitely gotten from him. And I think other notable things about himself are his activism in Puerto Rico.
So after Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico in 2017, you know, kind of left the country in this state of disrepair. And you had a lot of like these Puerto Rican artists, you know, kind of throw these concerts to do the best to like fundraise for the country. And while he was doing that, he was wearing a T-shirt that was directed at, you know, President Donald Trump. And it was, "Tú eres tuitero o presidente?" So are you, you know, are you Twitter or are you a president? You know, a tweeter. So I mean, this you know sprouts from like kind of the I was gonna say beef, but I guess kind of like the arguments, disdain between the mayor of Puerto Rico, Carmen Yulín Cruz, and Donald Trump, who were kind of continuing fighting about Trump and his administration not doing enough for Puerto Rico, and even though it's a U.S. colony or a U.S. Commonwealth, it's not being treated as such. And he kind of brings those issues to light as well.
Right, and he's even performed on The Tonight Show, again with Jimmy Fallon, where he was highlighting the year-long blackout in Puerto Rico and the death of more than 3,000 people. Ultimately, he was bringing attention to the infuriating negligence on behalf of local and federal governments in Puerto Rico. And being that he is Puerto Rican, this is something that he's made very clear is important to him. And there's Instagram posts that he's made before talking about Puerto Rico and even showing him there on the front lines alongside protesters there in Puerto Rico who were against the fairly corrupt Puerto Rican government.
Yeah, not to downplay like Hurricane Maria by any means, like this event would change kind of Puerto Rican government for like the next year in like such huge ways, in which Bad Bunny would also kind of have like this like reach in. So I think it's kind of fascinating that, I mean, again, not really knowing like this much about him, how Puerto Rico and Bad Bunny is like, it's all kind of tied together in this world of politics and music that creates like this really interesting blend of like him just being involved.
Right, and in 2018, like we mentioned earlier, he began to advocate more for better education in Puerto Rico, bringing awareness to, again, gender-based violence, embracing his femininity, and believing in his self-made dream. And in 2018 was actually when he releases 2 very significant videos. In his Solo de Mi video, he sings about autonomy after terminating a romantic partnership, and more importantly, in the video, the theme translated to a statement against gender-based violence, as he features a woman essentially lip-syncing the song, and as she's lip-syncing it, you see her turn and have makeup that is painted so that you can see that she's been a victim of domestic abuse and gender-based violence as a whole. And so I think the video shows how he wants to be a voice and continues to be a voice for women and overall just marginalized communities.
So in November of 2018, just a couple of weeks before this music video debuted, there was an incident in Puerto Rico where there was protesters that were camping outside of the governor's mansion for a full weekend, and what they were doing was that they were protesting, they were lobbying essentially for the governor, Ricardo Rosselló, to declare a state of emergency because of the femicide that was rampant in Puerto Rico at the time. It had just reached 41 women, and at least 23 of them, it was domestic violence related murders. And in 2018, the statistic goes that 1 woman was actually killed due to gender-based violence every 14 days. So Bad Bunny wanted to emphasize that Rosselló had claimed that he was a feminist, but he sent policemen to send tear gas to the protesters. The governor didn't really make a statement at all in reaction to this. So Bad Bunny said that the time to take action is now. He was condemning this, well, I wouldn't say action, or I would say lack of action. And he called for respect for women, saying less violence, more perreo. That's what he said.
Love that.
So I kind of want to go into who Rosselló really is and kind of, I guess, the relationship that Bad Bunny and Rosselló kind of, so a kind of a short, really short biography. He is or I guess was the former governor of Puerto Rico, and he served from 2017 to 2019, so a very short time period. So there was a couple of things that kind of led up to his resignation, and I'll kind of go over them and how it kind of all happened. But I also want to point out that he is the son of a former governor of Puerto Rico, so not the last term governor, but like I think his father was a governor like in 2001. So I just want to, okay, I'm painting a picture. That's the first stroke. So I was kind of going over like his political policies and what kind of he believes in. So he's a described centrist Democrat, but he has like this big focus on like fiscal policy. And kind of one of the first things that kind of paints, you know, a picture of what he is and kind of what's going on in Puerto Rico is that he opposes same-sex marriage, which if you're Bad Bunny, that's kind of a red flag for you immediately, because it kind of, you know, describes you as like this like homophobic person who is already has a bias against, you know, same-sex couples. So when he was elected, he started his campaign. He kind of started with a focus on like lowering the debt and making cuts where they needed to be. One of the first cuts that he proposed was cutting the Department of Education, which Bad Bunny has made, you know, support the department to support like schools and students in Puerto Rico. He cut natural resources, housing, agriculture, correction and justice, and even to be more specific, $200 million were cut for Puerto Rico's public university, which students were organizing strikes for the past 2 months. So this is seen as a reprimand against the students for the strikes that they were doing against their government. So kind of building off of that, and like people being, you know, not liking kind of the cuts that he was making, and kind of having like this emphasis on like lowering the debt. You had like this like big cut and all these resources, and then you have this huge hurricane hit Puerto Rico, and it's at this time where he's cutting all of these important structures away. So kind of similar to what you kind of see here with coronavirus, we had Trump kind of cutting like funding to all these like health experts, and now we really need them back. So it's kind of a repeat what happened there. He cut like all these funding for these sources where he thought he wouldn't need them, and then it turned out he actually really needed them. So a lot of people were really upset about how he was handling Hurricane Maria.
Right, and Bad Bunny even got to meet with Governor Rosselló in person. Even though it was an unscheduled meeting, it was essentially just a result of the late night attempts to gain entry into the governor La Fortaleza.
So he had gone down there with, I think it was Ricky Martin actually.
Oh yeah.
So it was him and Ricky Martin. Yeah. So they both they were both there joining the protesters, and they actually got allowed in after being told they couldn't come in. They went in around 2 a.m. and they kind of sat down and they had like this conversation with Rosselló, and they talked about the high crime rate and like how he was handling Hurricane Maria and kind of like the femicide issues. So that was kind of the talk. Ultimately, it came out. When it first came out, it was like an okay meeting, but then afterwards, he made a song with Residente, which is also an artist there, and it was basically, I think you should listen to it. It's like a diss track that's like completely against Rosselló, and it's not only against him, it's against his dad too.
Wow.
Which is like, so he calls his dad corrupt, and then he calls like, and you're more corrupt, and then Bad Bunny has like this set of lyrics, and it's and it just kind of goes like, let all continents know that Ricardo Rosselló is an incompetent, homophobic liar, a delinquent. No one wants you, not even your own people. Which is like, as harsh as you can get. I mean, it's pretty good.
So I think for anyone who thinks that Bad Bunny might just be using this Yo Perreo Sola video as like an opportunistic or some type of marketing money scheme, I think it's very clear that based on, you know, all of these different moments, that he's not just using this as like a marketing ploy, that it seems it's pretty apparent that he does genuinely have an interest in using his platform
and like,
to be involved in politics.
Those days like he joined the protests, he was actually in Europe doing a tour, so he put that on pause to just like stop doing that and come to Puerto Rico and join the protesters, where he didn't need to do that. He could have stayed in Europe and be making a lot of money, been eating good food, and having all these concerts, but he came to like support his people. So, and again, kind of where led to like his resignation, because he did like resign at the end. There was a scandal where he had like this group chat, just like so funny, with like 11 other political leaders in Puerto Rico, and they were all kind of making this homophobic statements and super misogynist statements against like other female politicians, where he was making jokes about Carmen Rilin Cruz, which is the mayor of San Juan. He was making jokes about like how he would be happy if like someone shot her for him. So I mean, it's just like this really weak mentality of like, during this, I didn't know this guy existed when Hurricane Maria happened. I just knew about this woman because she was actually like standing up for her people and having this fight. I didn't even know this guy was like a part of like the situation. So it's kind of this woman who's like taking a hold of the situation and being more powerful than he is, I guess, in the media. And I guess he didn't really like that. And those messages came out to the public, and you kind of had like, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, you can't really have a leader who is making those gender charged statements against his government. Like, that's kind of...
I think just to close it, because I like it when I have quotes, because this was funny also. It's she's a political science professor at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras. So political science, shout out. She said, there were a lot of jokes over the years about Ricardo Rosselló being this entitled kid who had all the privileges and never had to work or face any consequences for anything. The chats basically confirmed that. He was still very immature. He still talked like he didn't realize the responsibility that he had. I mean, that's all you had to know about him. He resigned later that year, and I think now So he resigned, and then the person underneath him resigned as well because he was also caught up. So I think the current person that's in charge for now is a woman.
So going back to Bad Bunny, he basically, I mean, he is making a statement, obviously. Like, he is a politically involved artist. He's no stranger to, you know, going out and fighting for what he believes in, obviously. He's not shy about his opinions either, which I think is really good because he's bringing to light a lot of issues that, you know, there's a lot of, in his industry, there's a lot of prejudice, there's a lot of barriers that keeps people from wanting to express themselves completely because they're afraid if I express myself this way or this way, I'm never going to make it in this industry. And unfortunately, because of the culture, you know, this actually does happen where we're kind of filtered out and we're not really seeing all of the unique artists that are out there. We're only seeing like kind of the same kind of artists over and over. And when starting out, I mean, Bad Bunny, when he got famous, he kind of was making like, you know, reggaeton, trap music, like the industry. But as he kept going, he instead became like this political firepower where now he's bringing to light all of these issues. And I think that it's awesome that he's not afraid to express himself and he's actually getting a lot of support for it. Along with all of the support that he's gotten, unfortunately, he's also gotten a lot of backlash because of his statements. In October of 2018, Bad Bunny actually received an open letter on Facebook from a teacher in Puerto Rico who was going after him because they claimed that his influence was detrimental to the children or the students. The teacher wrote, "It's frustrating to not be able to sleep because when I try to build up minds, you destroy them," which is a very strong statement. But I mean, Benito responded, you know, of course, he's no stranger to expressing himself. He wrote a 3-page open letter on Instagram in response to it that...
Being that in Puerto Rico, they were closing schools because of money shortages, Bad Bunny actually included in one of his lyrics in his Por Siempre album, in the Ser Bichote song, he says, "Resuelvan sus asuntos, si cierran escuelas mientras se abren puntos," which essentially translates to fix your problems, you're closing schools while opening points. And so this is a larger reflection of him criticizing, again, the government, which unfortunately, like Emily mentioned, comes with backlashes even from his own community.
Yeah, just like emphasizing that like Bad Bunny is such a small part of like he's a big part of the community, but his effect on like the educational system is probably so far detached that this letter is kind of I think she's painting, you know, Bad Bunny is like this big villain to like her students when in reality it's more of the government that's causing these problems. So they're already facing like a lot of these education cuts that were made before the hurricane, and then the hurricane comes and destroys a lot of schools, and like a lot of these students don't have, you know, you don't have homes to stay at, and they really can't afford to go to school anymore. And then she kind of writes this letter that's like kind of calling him out and saying that he's creating this generation of idiots with his indecent lyrics, and he's making the students want to be rappers instead of being studious. And kind of like Emily emphasized, you know, he did write back like this 3-page essay, but I kind of want to just say a quote that he said, and I kind of liked it. And pretty much he's saying that he's also, you know, he's a chamaco from the barrio also, you know, so he's also a product of that same school system. So the problem has been going on for, you know, much longer than he's ever been famous. So the quote goes, "You and your colleagues have also contributed to a plan of creating a generation of idiots. One where they tell you Christopher Columbus is a hero and is good, but wanting to know more than the teachers by asking difficult questions is bad." So it's like this clap back to the teacher for trying to call him out for something that's like not even his responsibility.
Mm-hmm. yeah, she goes off calling, like, and she even, the teacher, I know she says that he has a Robin Hood syndrome, and at the end of her letter where she says that he's part of creating that generation of imbeciles, she also says that, compares him to Ricardo Rosello, saying like, bravo Bad Bunny, bravo Ricardo Rosello. And then she says that she's a completely frustrated teacher and this is just her ranting, which is pretty unfortunate, especially given that quote you mentioned, that Bad Bunny's a product of those teachings. So this really just, I think, overall encompasses the fact that he has had a big hand in political activism, using his platform, going from like music videos to lyrics to even like social media posts.
Right. And I think that Robin Hood analogy, although I think she did it to hurt him, I actually like it a lot.
Yeah.
Because he was like this
Agreed.
artist is like yeah, he's like giving back to like his people. I think that's really cool, and I think if anything, he really is like in the sense of Robin Hood to Puerto Rico.
Definitely. So I think overall, it's really clear to see that Bad Bunny has a really incredible history with activism, all while being a really big reggaeton and urbano Latino artist. And I think he's really paving the way for other men in the Latinx community to move towards pushing away from toxic masculinity, embracing LGBTQ plus rights, and especially using their privilege and positions of power to talk about women's rights and problems that overall marginalized communities are continuing to face today in our communities. And as he says in his video, si no quiere bailar contigo, respeta, ella perrea sola. Overall, thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate you. And as Bad Bunny said, less violence, more perreo.
Okay, thanks guys.
Cute.